Imagine buying your dream home, planting roses in the front yard, and putting your kids in the local school, and then finding out the land under your house belongs to a man nobody told you about, and the dam keeping your neighborhood dry is his to open whenever he wants. That's what 79 families learned the hard way when a developer used a fake survey and a friendly HOA president to build an entire subdivision on my family's 300-acre property. I could have stopped construction on day one. I had the deed. I had the title chain. I had a lawyer ready to file an injunction before the first foundation was poured. But I didn't stop them. I let them build every house, sell every lot, move every family in. And when the judge declared the whole development was on my land, I drove down to the dam my grandfather built in 1958, put my hand on the valve he'd installed with Army Corps approval, and opened it. 60 acres of water poured into the valley, and 79 homes found out what a floodplain looks like without a dam. Stay right here. You're going to want to hear how this ends. The land sits in the Watauga River basin of Upper East Tennessee, about 20 miles southeast of Johnson City. 312 acres of rolling pasture, hardwood forest, and bottomland that follows Stony Fork Creek from the ridgeline down into a broad, flat valley that locals have called the Kettle since before the Civil War. The name fits. The valley sits in a natural bowl, hills on three sides, a narrow gap on the south end where the creek used to flow out toward the Watauga. My great-grandfather, Emmett Pace, bought the land in 1931. He was a farmer, a moonshiner when the occasion called for it, and the kind of man who never signed a document he hadn't read 3 times. He raised cattle in the upland pastures and grew corn and tobacco in the bottomland. The Kettle flooded every spring, sometimes 4 feet of standing water for weeks, and Emmett knew it. He worked around it. He planted late, harvested early, and kept his barns on the high ground. In 1958, my grandfather, Dale Pace, decided to do something about the flooding. He worked with the Soil Conservation Service, what's now the NRCS, to build an earthen dam across the narrow gap at the south end of the valley. The dam was 22 feet high, compacted clay core, stone-armored spillway on the west side, and a 36-inch reinforced concrete low-level outlet pipe with a manually operated gate valve. The SCS helped with the engineering. Granddad supplied the labor and the land. The project took 2 years. By 1960, the dam impounded a 60-acre reservoir that my family called Pace Lake, a wide, shallow body of water that controlled flooding, watered cattle, and held more crappie and largemouth bass than any lake in the county. Every document related to that dam, the SCS engineering plans, the construction permits, the land survey, the maintenance logs, was filed with the county and the state. The dam sat entirely on Pace family land. The reservoir sat entirely on Pace family land, and the 300 acres of valley, pasture, and forest surrounding it sat entirely on Pace family land. There was no ambiguity. There was no shared boundary. There was no question. My father, Roy Pace, inherited the property in 1989. He maintained the dam, kept the valve functional, cleared the spillway every fall. He died in 2016, and the whole thing came to me. I was 31, working as a civil engineer for a firm in Kingsport, and suddenly the owner of the largest private landholding in the township. By then, a development called Ridgeline Estates had grown up on the hills north and east of our property. Started in the early 2000s as a small cluster of retirement homes. By 2016, it had 160 houses, a clubhouse, a pool, and an HOA run by a woman named Connie Dressler. Connie was a retired insurance adjuster from Charlotte, who had moved to East Tennessee for the mountain air and stayed for the power. She ran the HOA like a personal franchise. Annual dues, architectural review, landscaping mandates, the whole playbook. And she had her eye on the Kettle. The first sign of trouble came in the spring of 2018. I got a letter from the Carter County Planning Department informing me that a preliminary subdivision plat had been filed for Ridgeline Estates Phase 3, 79 residential lots on approximately 210 acres of land, described as adjacent to and south of the existing Ridgeline Estates development. I read the legal description 3 times. Then I pulled out my own survey. The lots they'd platted weren't adjacent to Ridgeline Estates. They were on my land. Basically, they covered the entire Kettle, the floodplain valley below the dam, the lower pastures, and a good portion of the creek bottom. I drove to the planning office the next morning. The clerk showed me the plat. It was professionally drawn, stamped by a licensed surveyor, and signed by a developer named Burl Winslow, Connie Dressler's son-in-law. The plat showed 79 lots, ranging from a quarter acre to half an acre, laid out in neat cul-de-sacs across the valley floor. Streets named Crescent View Drive, Lakeview Court, and, this one really got me, Pace Meadow Lane. They'd named a street after my family, on land they didn't own. I asked the clerk whether anyone had verified the ownership of the land in the plat. She looked at me blankly. "The surveyor certifies the boundaries," she said. I asked to see the surveyor's certification. She pulled it up. The surveyor, a man named Grady Feltz, who happened to be Burl Winslow's college roommate, had certified the boundaries as matching the developer's title description. But the title description was wrong. It referenced the parcel number that belonged to a 50-acre tract my great-grandfather had sold to a timber company in 1947, a tract that sat 3 miles east of the Kettle and had nothing to do with my property. In plain English, the developer had used the wrong parcel number, whether by mistake or by design, and the surveyor had certified it without checking the actual deed. The planning department had accepted the plat without cross-referencing the county tax records. Nobody had noticed that the land described in the filing was not the land shown on the map. I pointed this out to the clerk. She said she'd flag it for review. I asked when the review would happen. She said she'd have to check with her supervisor. The supervisor was on vacation. For 2 weeks, I went home, sat on my porch, and stared at the dam. The reservoir was full from spring rains, the water lapping at the stone spillway, green-gray and calm. Somewhere below that dam, in the valley that had flooded every spring for 1,000 years before Granddad stopped it, somebody was planning to build 79 houses. I called my attorney that afternoon, a property lawyer in Johnson City named Frank Wilder. Frank had handled my father's estate and knew the Pace land inside and out. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Colton, that's either the dumbest clerical error I've ever seen, or the most brazen land grab in Carter County history." He told me to do nothing yet. File nothing. Say nothing. Just document everything and let him pull the title chain. He said if the plat was based on a bad parcel number, the entire subdivision approval could be voided, but only if we caught it at the right time, in the right way, with the right evidence. So I waited. I took photos of the survey stakes. I recorded GPS coordinates. I saved every document. And I watched. By June, construction had begun. Not the quiet, tentative kind, where a crew tests the soil and sets a few forms. The aggressive kind, bulldozers, graders, excavators. A fleet of dump trucks hauling fill dirt into the Kettle to raise the grade level for the home pads. They cut a construction road through the lower pasture, flattened 3 acres of bottomland hardwoods, and began pouring concrete foundations before the summer solstice. I watched all of it from the ridge. Every morning, I'd drive my truck to the overlook, where Granddad used to park when he checked the cattle, and I'd sit there with my coffee and my binoculars, watching heavy equipment reshape land my family had worked for 90 years. It was surreal, like watching someone rearrange the furniture in your house while you stand in the doorway. Frank Wilder was working the legal angle. He'd pulled the full title chain and confirmed what I already knew. The parcel number on the subdivision plat didn't match my land, but the physical description on the surveyor's map did. The developer had essentially filed paperwork for one piece of land and started building on another. Whether Burl Winslow had done this deliberately, or whether Grady Feltz had simply botched the survey, the result was the same. 79 homes were being built on land owned by Colton Pace, without Colton Pace's knowledge or consent. Frank filed a quiet title action in July. He also filed a lis pendens, a legal notice attached to the property records warning anyone who checked the title that the ownership was in dispute. The lis pendens was public record. Any competent title company doing a search for a home buyer would find it. But here's the thing about developments that move fast. The title searches weren't happening yet. Burl Winslow was selling lots off the plat before the homes were built. Pre-construction sales to retirees and young families who trusted the Ridgeline Estates name and Connie Dressler's reassurance that everything was fully permitted and legally sound. By the end of August, 43 of the 79 lots had been sold. Buyers had put down deposits. Some had secured construction loans. A few had already broken ground on custom homes. None of them knew they were building on my land. I could have stopped it. Frank told me I had grounds for an emergency injunction that would have halted all construction within a week. A judge would have looked at the title discrepancy, the lis pendens, and the unauthorized grading on my property, and shut the whole thing down. But I didn't file the injunction. And here's why. If I stopped construction in August, the developer would lose money on the grading and the road work, maybe a few $100,000. The HOA would blame me. The buyers would be inconvenienced, but would get their deposits back. Connie Dressler would spin the whole thing as a land dispute and come out looking like a victim. But if I waited, if I let them finish building, let them sell the homes, let them move families in, let the HOA collect dues on 79 new addresses, then the full weight of the fraud would land on Burl Winslow, Grady Feltz, and Connie Dressler. The title insurance companies would be on the hook. The county would have to answer for approving a plat on the wrong parcel. And every buyer would learn the truth not from me, but from the legal system. Frank looked at me across his desk and said, "You understand what you're doing? You're letting them build a neighborhood on your land so the consequences are bigger when the truth comes out." I said, "No, Frank. I'm letting them dig a hole so deep they can't climb out." He leaned back in his chair, took off his glasses and said, "Your grandfather would have done the same thing." By the fall of 2018, Connie Dressler was running Ridgeline Estates, Phase 3, like it was her personal kingdom's expansion. She'd set up a model home on Lot 12, a 4-bedroom craftsman with a wraparound porch and a view of the reservoir. She hosted open houses every weekend, serving sweet tea and handing out brochures that described the neighborhood as a lakefront community with unmatched natural beauty and a strong HOA presence. Lakefront. She was selling my reservoir as a feature. She was marketing my family's water to strangers who thought they were buying into a professionally developed subdivision. The brochures even had a section titled Community Amenities that listed the lake, walking trails around the shoreline, fishing access, and a future kayak launch. None of these amenities existed. None had been permitted, and every single one of them would have been located on land I owned. Connie's marketing machine was relentless. She had a website with drone footage of the reservoir at sunset. She had testimonials from Phase 1 and Phase 2 homeowners praising the community atmosphere. She had a sales team of 3 agents working the model home in shifts. The average home price was $320,000. At 79 lots, the total development value was north of $25 million. $25 million of homes on land that cost the developer exactly $0 because he'd never bought it. Meanwhile, Frank Wilder had been busy. He'd obtained the original SCS engineering file for the dam, the same dam my grandfather built in 1958. The file confirmed that the dam, the reservoir, and the entire downstream floodplain were on Pace family land. He'd also pulled the county's floodplain maps, which showed the Kettle Valley as a designated FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area, Zone AE, with a base flood elevation that put the entire valley under 4 to 6 feet of water during a 100-year flood event. Here's the critical detail. The floodplain designation was based on the assumption that the dam existed and was maintained. Without the dam, the valley didn't just flood occasionally. It flooded predictably, reliably, every single spring when snowmelt and rain pushed Stony Fork Creek over its banks. The dam was the only thing keeping the kettle dry enough to build on, and I owned the dam. More than that, I was legally responsible for the dam. Under Tennessee's Dam Safety Act, I was the registered owner and operator of a Class II dam. I was required to maintain it, inspect it annually, and report any changes to the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. If I decided to decommission the dam, to stop maintaining it and allow it to breach naturally, or to open the low-level outlet and drain the reservoir, I had the legal right to do so, provided I followed proper notification and downstream impact procedures. Burl Winslow had built 79 homes in a floodplain that was only dry because my family had spent 60 years holding back a creek. He'd never checked the floodplain maps. He'd never consulted FEMA. He'd never asked who owned the dam or what would happen if it stopped functioning. He'd just seen flat land near a pretty lake and started selling lots. Frank and I sat in his office one evening in October, the title chain spread across his conference table, the dam engineering file open beside it. He looked at me and said, "Colton, you don't just own the land under their houses. You own the reason the land is buildable." I nodded. "And if you ever stop maintaining that dam," I finished his sentence, The valley goes back to what it was before 1960, a seasonal swamp. Frank closed the file, rubbed his eyes, and said, "I've been practicing law for 28 years. I've never seen a case where one man holds this many cards." That winter, I drove to the county clerk's office in Elizabethton and spent 3 full days in the records room. I pulled every document connected to the Pace land, the dam, the reservoir, and the Ridgeline Estates development. I was building a complete legal history, the kind of file that doesn't just win a case, it ends a career. What I found was worse than I expected. The surveyor, Grady Feltz, hadn't just used the wrong parcel number. He'd created a fictitious title reference. The parcel he'd cited, the one my great-grandfather sold to the timber company in 1947, had been subdivided and resold 4 times since then. It was now a tree farm owned by a Baptist church in Irwin. The legal description bore no resemblance to the Kettle Valley. Feltz had essentially manufactured a paper trail that connected the developer to land that had never been for sale. I also found that the county planning department had received a comment letter during the plat review period from the NRCS, the modern successor to the old Soil Conservation Service, noting that the proposed development sat within a dam inundation zone and recommending a hydrological review before approval. The planning department had filed the letter and never responded. The dam inundation zone. That's the area downstream of a dam that would be flooded if the dam failed or was deliberately opened. The NRCS had flagged it. The county had ignored it, and Burl Winslow had built 79 houses in it. I also pulled something I hadn't expected. A letter from Connie Dressler to the County Planning Commission, dated 3 months before the plat was filed, recommending approval of the Phase 3 development and personally vouching for Burl Winslow's credentials as a developer. She'd signed it as HOA president. She'd used HOA letterhead. She'd represented the development as an official HOA-endorsed expansion. The HOA board had never voted on it. I confirmed this through Reggie Wallace, a retired electrician who sat on the Ridgeline Estates board and was quietly horrified by what Connie had done. He told me the Phase 3 development had never appeared on a single board agenda. Connie had endorsed it unilaterally. I drove home that evening with a box of photocopies on the passenger seat and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were locking together like the stones in Grandad's spillway, each one supporting the next, holding the whole structure tight. I spent the first 3 months of 2019 preparing, not reacting, not arguing, preparing, the way Grandad would have, methodically, quietly, and with the patience of a man who knows the creek doesn't care who you think you are. First, I hired a licensed professional engineer. Not just any engineer, but a dam safety specialist named Hal Brevard out of Knoxville. Hal had inspected over 200 dams in Tennessee and had testified in 4 dam-related lawsuits. I paid him to conduct a full safety assessment of the Pace Dam, including structural integrity, spillway capacity, outlet works functionality, and downstream inundation modeling. His report was 46 pages long. The dam was structurally sound. The spillway was functional. The low-level outlet gate valve operated correctly, and the downstream inundation analysis showed that if the dam were breached or fully drained, the Kettle Valley would experience water depths of 3 to 6 feet across the entire developed area, with flow velocities sufficient to damage foundations, flood basements, and render the homes uninhabitable during any sustained high water event. In plain terms, without the dam, the neighborhood drowns every spring. Second, I commissioned a new boundary survey, not from Grady Feltz, but from a firm in Kingsport with no connection to Burl Winslow or anyone in Carter County. The surveyor, Beth Ann Crow, walked every boundary line with GPS equipment, set new iron pins, and produced a certified plat that showed, with millimeter precision, exactly where my property began and ended. 79 homes, 79 lots, every single one inside my boundary lines. Third, I filed a formal complaint with the Tennessee Board of Examiners for Land Surveyors against Grady Feltz, alleging fraudulent boundary certification. The complaint included his plat, my plat, the county records, and the fictitious parcel number. The board opened an investigation within 30 days. Fourth, Frank Wilder filed an amended quiet title action that named every party in the chain. Burl Winslow as developer, Grady Feltz as surveyor, Connie Dressler as HOA president who endorsed the development, the Carter County Planning Department for approving the plat without due diligence, and the title company that had issued policies on the lots. The lawsuit didn't ask for monetary damages. Not yet. It asked the court to declare, definitively and publicly, that the 79 lots in Ridgeline Estates Phase 3 were located on land owned by Colton Pace and had been developed without the landowner's authorization. Fifth, I filed a dam decommissioning notice with TDEC. The notice stated my intent to cease active maintenance of the Pace Dam and to open the low-level outlet valve to lower the reservoir level. The notice included Hal Brevard's inundation analysis, downstream impact assessment, and a notification plan for affected property owners. TDEC reviewed the filing and responded within 60 days. My maintenance obligations were voluntary, not mandatory, provided I followed proper notification procedures. I was within my rights. Sixth, I did something that mattered to me personally. I walked every inch of that valley, every cul-de-sac, every freshly poured driveway, every landscaped yard. I looked at the homes. Some were beautiful. Young families had moved in. Kids' bikes leaned against garage doors. An older couple had already planted rose bushes along their front walk. These weren't bad people. They were victims of a fraud they didn't know about. I felt for them. I did. But my sympathy was for the homeowners, not for the people who had put them there. Finally, I waited for the court date. Frank had requested a summary judgment hearing for June. The evidence was overwhelming. The title chain was fraudulent. The survey was fabricated. The county had ignored federal flood warnings. The HOA president had endorsed the whole thing without board approval. And the man who owned the land, and the dam that made it livable, was sitting quietly on a ridge, watching it all from the same spot his grandfather had watched the valley fill with water 60 years ago. By May of 2019, 73 of the 79 homes were occupied. The remaining 6 were under construction. Ridgeline Estates Phase 3 had its own entrance sign, its own mailbox cluster, its own recycling schedule, and its own Facebook group with 412 members. Connie Dressler had absorbed it into the main HOA, raised the annual dues by $300 per household, and appointed herself chair of the Lake and Recreation Subcommittee, a committee that existed solely to manage access to my reservoir. She'd installed a kayak rack on the eastern shore. She'd mowed a walking path along the waterline. She'd put up a sign that said, Ridgeline Estates Community Lake, residents only, with the HOA logo and her phone number at the bottom. My phone number was nowhere on it. Neither was my name. Neither was my deed reference. It was as if I didn't exist, as if the land, the lake, and the dam had materialized from thin air the day Connie decided she wanted them. The homeowners had no idea. To them, the lake was a neighborhood perk. They fished from the shore on weekends. They kayaked at sunset. They posted photos on the Facebook group with hashtags like #LakeLife and #RidgelineViews. A woman named Tammy posted a video of her golden retriever jumping off the dock into the water and got 236 likes. It was sweet, it was innocent, and it was happening entirely on my property. I didn't blame the homeowners. Not one of them had been told the truth. They'd bought homes based on a fraudulent plat, a fabricated survey, and the assurances of an HOA president who had endorsed a land grab for her own family's profit. When the truth came out, they'd be angry, but not at me, at the people who had lied to them. In late May, Frank called me with news. The court had scheduled the summary judgment hearing for June 19th. The judge assigned to the case was Raymond Tuttle, a senior circuit court judge known for being methodical, patient, and absolutely merciless when he smelled fraud. Frank said, Tuttle doesn't grandstand. He reads every page. He asks precise questions. And when he rules like a stonemason, every word placed to hold weight. I asked Frank if we were ready. He said, Colton, I've been a lawyer for 28 years. I've never walked into a courtroom with a stronger case. They built 79 houses on your land using a fake parcel number, a compromised survey, and an HOA endorsement that the board never approved. The county ignored a federal flood warning. The developer never verified ownership. And you own the dam that keeps the whole valley above water. If I can't win this case, I need to retire. I spent the weekend before the hearing on the cabin porch, looking at the reservoir. The water was high from spring rains. The spillway was running, a steady, silver sheet of water pouring over the stone lip and disappearing into the creek bed below. I could hear it from the porch, that constant, musical rush. Granddad used to say the spillway was the dam's voice. It told you how full it was, how strong it was, how much pressure it was holding. That night, it sounded like it was holding a lot. June 19th, Circuit Court of Carter County, Courtroom B. I wore a charcoal suit my father had bought me for my college graduation. Frank wore his usual, navy jacket, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, a briefcase that had more miles on it than most pickup trucks in the county. We arrived at 8:30. Burl Winslow showed up with 2 attorneys from a Nashville firm. Expensive suits, leather portfolios, the kind of lawyers who bill by the quarter hour and drive German cars. Connie Dressler sat in the gallery behind them in a cream-colored blazer, her arms crossed, her face set like concrete. Grady Feltz was not present. His attorney had filed a motion to be excluded, claiming Feltz was a peripheral party. Judge Tuttle denied the motion. Feltz was ordered to appear. He didn't. The judge noted it. The county planning department sent a representative, a nervous young woman named Elaine, who sat in the back row with a manila folder and the expression of someone who knows she's about to be asked questions nobody prepared her for. Frank laid out the case in 45 minutes. He projected the 2 plats side by side on the courtroom screen, the developer's plat with the fake parcel number, and Beth Ann Crow's certified survey showing the actual Pace property boundaries. The overlay was devastating. Every lot, every street, every cul-de-sac sat inside the red boundary line of my land. There was no overlap with the parcel Feltz had cited. The 2 properties were 3 miles apart. Frank presented the title chain. He presented the fictitious parcel reference. He presented the SCS dam file. He presented Hal Brevard's inundation analysis. He presented the NRCS comment letter that the county had ignored. He presented Connie Dressler's endorsement letter on HOA letterhead. He presented the board minutes showing the Phase 3 development had never been voted on. He then turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, the respondents built 79 homes on land they do not own. The plat was based on a false parcel number. The survey was fabricated. The county approved it without verifying ownership or addressing federal flood warnings. The HOA president endorsed it without board authorization. And the petitioner, Mr. Pace, owns not only the land beneath these homes, but the dam and reservoir that make the land habitable. Without his dam, this valley floods every spring. The respondents didn't just build on his property. They built their entire development on his goodwill." The Nashville attorneys objected to several of Frank's exhibits. Judge Tuttle overruled every objection. They argued the developer had relied on the surveyor's certification in good faith. Judge Tuttle asked to see the surveyor's field notes. The attorneys didn't have them. They said Feltz had not provided them. The judge made a note. When Connie Dressler's name came up, the Nashville attorneys tried to distance their client from her actions. Judge Tuttle read her endorsement letter aloud in open court, every word, including the sentence where she described Burl Winslow as a trusted family partner. The gallery stirred. A woman in the 3rd row, a Phase 3 homeowner, whispered something to her husband. His face went white. The hearing lasted 4.5 hours. Judge Tuttle recessed for lunch, returned at 1:30, and said he would issue a written ruling within 14 days. I walked out of that courtroom into the June heat, my jacket over my arm, and stood on the courthouse steps looking down at the town. Frank stood beside me, loosening his tie. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "That judge read every page, every single page." I nodded. We shook hands, and I drove home. Judge Tuttle issued his ruling on July 2nd. It was 31 pages long. He declared, in unambiguous language, that the 79 lots comprising Ridgeline Estates Phase 3 were located on land owned by Colton Pace, as evidenced by an unbroken chain of title dating to 1931. He found that the subdivision plat was based on a fraudulent parcel reference and a deficient boundary survey. He found that the county planning department had failed in its duty to verify land ownership before approving the plat. He found that the HOA president had issued an unauthorized endorsement that materially influenced the development's approval. He ordered the plat vacated. He ordered the developer to cease all further construction, and he referred the matter to the Carter County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal fraud. The ruling hit the local news that afternoon. By evening, it was on the Knoxville stations. By the next morning, it was on regional wire services. The headline in the Johnson City Press read, "Judge rules 79 homes built on wrong man's land." And then I opened the dam. Not all at once, not recklessly. I'd filed my TDEC, decommissioning notice, months earlier. I'd completed the downstream notification. Hal Brevard was on site to monitor the flow rate. I opened the low-level outlet valve on the morning of July 5th, slowly, methodically, the way Granddad had taught me to manage water. Not as punishment, as truth. The reservoir began to lower. Over the next 72 hours, 60 acres of impounded water drained through the 36-inch outlet pipe and flowed down Stony Fort Creek's original channel, a channel that ran directly through the heart of Phase 3. The water didn't surge. It rose gradually, the way spring floods always had before Granddad built the dam. But it rose. 3 feet in the lowest lots, 2 feet along the streets, standing water in basements, crawl spaces, and garages across the entire development. The photos went national. 79 homes standing in brown water, streets turned to rivers, moving trucks stuck in mud, a kayak rack, Connie Dressler's kayak rack, floating sideways near what used to be the shoreline. The drone footage showed the empty reservoir basin on one side and the flooded neighborhood on the other, connected by a stream that had been running through that valley since before anyone alive could remember. The homeowners were evacuated within 48 hours. The county declared a local emergency. FEMA sent an assessment team. The National Weather Service confirmed there had been no unusual rainfall. The flooding was caused entirely by the controlled release of an impounded reservoir on private property, consistent with the dam owner's filed decommissioning notice. I didn't give interviews. Frank gave one, a careful, factual statement to the Knoxville News-Sentinel. He explained that Mr. Pace had exercised his legal right to cease maintenance of a privately owned dam on his own property, in accordance with Tennessee law and TDEC procedures. He noted that the developer had built 79 homes in a federally designated flood zone without consulting the dam owner or verifying the floodplain status. He said, "The valley is returning to its natural hydrological state. The water is doing what it has always done. The only thing that changed is that Mr. Pace stopped holding it back." Connie Dressler was photographed standing on the elevated entrance road to Phase 3, watching the water from behind a police barricade. She was wearing rubber boots and a windbreaker. Her clipboard was nowhere in sight. A reporter asked her for a comment. She said, "This man destroyed a community out of spite." The reporter asked, "Did you know the homes were built on his land?" She didn't answer. She turned around and walked back to her car. That photograph, Connie in her rubber boots, the flooded neighborhood behind her, the empty reservoir basin beyond that, ran on the front page of 3 newspapers. It became the image of the story. The woman who built a kingdom on borrowed land, standing at the edge of what borrowed land looks like when the owner takes it back. The aftermath was as thorough as the flood. Burl Winslow's development company filed for bankruptcy in September. Grady Feltz lost his surveying license after the state board found he had knowingly certified a boundary survey based on a fraudulent parcel reference. He was also charged with 1 count of felony fraud. He pleaded no contest and received 2 years probation and a permanent ban from licensed surveying in Tennessee. Connie Dressler was removed from the HOA board in an emergency vote, 141-3. The county opened an ethics investigation into her endorsement letter. She and Burl Winslow were named as co-defendants in a class action lawsuit filed by 58 Phase 3 homeowners seeking recovery of their purchase prices, closing costs, and relocation expenses. The suit also named the title insurance companies, the Carter County Planning Department, and the real estate agents who had sold the lots. The county planning department conducted an internal review that resulted in new procedures requiring independent title verification for all subdivision plats. The planning director retired early. Elaine, the nervous young woman from the courtroom, was promoted to senior planner and became, by all accounts, the most diligent reviewer in the department's history. The 79 homes sat empty through the winter. Water receded as fall came, but the damage was structural. Foundation cracks, mold in the walls, warped framing. Insurance adjusters walked through every house and wrote the same conclusion. The homes were built in a floodplain without adequate flood protection, and the flood protection that had existed, my dam, had been a private structure that the developer had no right to rely upon. Most of the homeowners settled with the title insurance companies. A few sued Burl Winslow personally. The total losses across all parties exceeded $30 million. Not $1 came from me. But here's the part I want you to remember. After the court ruling and the flooding and the news coverage and the lawsuits, a group of the displaced homeowners reached out to me through Frank. They weren't angry at me. They were angry at the people who had lied to them, but they wanted to know, was there any future for the land? I met with 7 of them on a Saturday morning at my cabin. I made coffee. We sat on the porch and looked down at the valley. The kettle, drained and muddy. The abandoned homes standing in rows like monuments to a bad idea. One woman, a schoolteacher named Grace, asked me what I planned to do with the land now. I told her the truth. I planned to let the valley go back to what it was. Wetlands, floodplain, the way it had been before Granddad dammed it. I'd work with the NRCS to restore the creek channel and establish a conservation easement. The land would be protected. No one would ever build on it again. Grace nodded. She said, "That sounds right." The conservation easement was recorded the following spring. 312 acres of Pace family land, protected in perpetuity. The creek runs free through the kettle now, the way it did before 1960. In spring, the valley floods gently, and the wetlands fill with herons, wood ducks, and more frogs than you can count. The old dam still stands. I left the structure intact as a historical feature, but the valve is open, and the water moves the way water is supposed to move. I put a bench at the top of the ridge, right where Granddad used to park. It faces the valley. On clear mornings, you can see the creek winding through the bottomland, silver in the early light. I sit there sometimes with my coffee and think about Emmett, who bought the land, and Dale, who dammed the creek, and Roy, who kept it all together, and me, who let it go. If your HOA has ever tried to build something on ground that wasn't theirs, whether it's a fence, a sign, or 79 houses, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because next week I'm telling you about the HOA president who tried to annex a veteran's property while he was deployed overseas. The whole base showed up at the board meeting. You do not want to miss that.
What sticks with me about Colton's story isn't the flooding of the court ruling or the photograph of Connie Dressler in her rubber boots. It's the patience. 2 years of watching people build on his land, sell his land, landscape his land, and post sunset photos of his lake. And he never once lost his composure. He documented, he filed, he hired the right people, and he waited for the system to confirm that he already knew. That's the lesson. Your property is your property. The deed doesn't stop being valid because someone files a fake partial number. The dam doesn't stop being yours because someone puts a kayak rack on the shore. And the truth doesn't stop being true just because someone prints 500 brochures that says otherwise. Dressler thought she could absorb 300 acres into her HOA by sheer willpower and a cream-colored razor. Burl Winslow thought he could build a $25 million neighborhood without buying the land first, and Grady Fells thought no one would ever compare his flat to the real one. They were all wrong, and the water proved it. If your HOA has ever tried to take something that wasn't yet theirs, whether it's a fence line, a shared driveway, or an entire floodplain, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed, hit the button now, because next week I'm bringing you to the story of the HOA president that tried to annex a deployed soldier's house while he was overseas. His entire unit showed up at the next board meeting in dress uniform. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one.